Hello everybody. I've had a couple of questions come up on how to use InDesign features. One of them was how to apply a gradient to maybe some type or a symbol, and the other is how to apply the gradient in general. So I'm going to take this document I've been working on. I'm going to move the background. Actually, I'll just delete it, both of them. And I'm going to create a gradient in my background. Now, to create a gradient, first off, we want to use the rectangle tool, assuming that's the shape you want. And you can click and drag and draw whatever shape. Now by default it's filled it with my Pantone color because that's the last thing I had used here. Now if I wanted to create a gradient between that and white or that and black, keeping in mind this is a two-color job. White is a free color, by the way. We don't use white ink, it's the white of the paper that shows through. So let's say I want to create a gradient on this object. First, the fill is, I went ahead and selected a color. You probably should have the stroke as none. Okay? I'm going to go back to the fill. And we have two gradient options here. We have a gradient swatch tool and we have a gradient feather tool. We're actually going to use the gradient swatch tool. Now, if I click and drag on this icon or this box, it will put a gradient in there, but it will be black and white. And I don't want black and white. I wanted my Pantone 117 color. So what I need to do is I need to go over here to the panel. If you don't see the word gradient up or a symbol for gradient, then you may have to go to Window and let's see, go to Color and then choose Gradient. So sometimes the gradient is not there. Like if you've drug it off of the panel and you've closed it, it's not there at all. So I will go to Window, Color, and Gradient, and it will pop back up. I'm going to bring it back over to the dock. Alright, now when I click on this, you can see that when I clicked and used the gradient tool, the default gradient was black to white, or white to black, however you want to look at it. Now I'm going to bring my swatches panel up. The only problem is I need the gradient and the swatches up at the same time. So this is always a problem for me. So I actually will click on the gradient, tear it off of the dock, bring it over. If you click on the actual image of the gradient, you'll get that opened. And then I click on the swatches panel and I can work with the two together. Now, to create a gradient, first I have this selected, it is gradiated. Then I use these sliders here to apply the color. Now these gradient sliders, if you notice when I'm sliding them back and forth, you'll see how the gradient gets darker. That means there's more of a percentage of the black, and there's a pretty extreme gradation between the two. The farther apart they are, the softer the gradation. Now I'm going to grab my Pantone 117 and I'm going to drag it and place it right on top of this black slider. There we go. Now I have a gradient that goes from white to my golden color. Now if you want to switch those, you can click the reverse gradient button. If you would like the gradient to go a different direction, there are a couple different ways. You could set the location at a different angle or location. Actually, usually what I do is I go back to the gradient tool and I'll click and drag whatever direction I want that gradient to go. Now I can even click way outside of this box and start the gradient pretty far outside. And the darker color will actually be hidden back here. So it goes from darkest color to lightest color, at least that's how I have it set up now. If I click a lot closer or within here, it'll have a solid color of my Pantone and it'll have solid white here, and you'll see that it's a much deeper gradient. So if you want it more subtle, sometimes I'll click way outside and that creates a subtle gradient. Now I might choose to put this as a background. Some of you may want to do that. Object, arrange, send to back. Now it may not make a lot of sense with this particular design to do that. Okay, I'm going to park the gradient back over here for just a minute and I can move it around. But you can see that with this particular design, that gradient is not working out very well. So I may have to grab my gradient slider again. I will have to zoom way out. I may start way down there, start gradiating up because I really need the accent to show. So the other thing is I might start way out here and I might stop the gradient right about here because I need it to be white. So I have just a subtle sort of gradient. Let me hit the W key. Not sure I really appreciate that either, but that's how you do a gradient within a box. Now some of you have thought about, I think this was Brian, he thought about how do I put a gradient within maybe some text or a shape. Well, for text, he was using an omega symbol, if you guys recall. I'm going to copy this out here, and I'm going to zoom in. For text to gradiate it, again, I would choose the gradient tool, and I can slide that, click and drag that over that text, and you're like, oh, it's in the box. I don't want it to be in the box. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control Z. Now, for this to affect the type, there's two places you can go. One is in the tool panel. Right now, the formatting is affecting the container that the text is in. If you want the formatting or gradient to affect the text, you click on this little T. And these are really quiet little features that most people wouldn't think to click on. The other thing, as far as there's another place to go if you're not wanting to deal with it over here, you can also deal with it in the swatches panel. Here is the formatting for the container or bounding box. Here again is formatting for text. Now if I click on the gradient and I drag it over the text, it will gradiate that text. Okay? Again, if you wanted to change the color of the gradient, you might want to rip swatches off, open it, open the gradient. Either way, you can either rip the swatches off the dock or the gradient. One of them has to be ripped off to be able to see them both at the same time. And if I wanted this to be, instead of this tan color to white, and I wanted it to be tan to black, I will click on the black color and drag it over to that slider, the gradient slider. Whoops, excuse me. You also see me mess up with clicking on underneath here. You can create all sorts of gradient sliders. So if you want to create rainbow, which this color's two-color job, it's black and one other color plus white is free, but you won't have multiple gradients like this unless you were trying to make it look like gold, which in that case I could, let me move swatches again, I could say, okay, I'm going to go from gold to a medium gold, and then I'm going to go to a black. Oops, let me grab black again. Oops, heavens to Murgatroyd. Let me Command Z that. Put a slider in there. Drag the black to the slider. You can see here how it's kind of making this look shiny. Add another slider, make it black. Add another slider, make it white or paper. Now usually I suggest not doing something like this because we're talking about something antiquated and this looks like it's modern chrome or something. So there are ways to add a lot more sliders. This is the position of where the center of the gradient is on that particular band within the gradient. So that's called the location right there. So that's where do those two colors meet in the center. So these two colors, that would be their center. Now on this, I might even grab the gradient tool, move the swatches panel back over here, and if I click and drag at an angle, then now I have this thing that looks kind of shiny. Again, this is probably not a real good idea for this project because even though I'm using only two colors, we're talking about an antiquated system here, so I'm not sure how modern we should have this looking. Now, the other thing is if you have a piece of art. Now, in order to do a gradient on a piece of art, the art has to be, it can't be vector. It has to be a raster, 1200 pixels per inch, bitmapped TIFF. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me open this guy, assuming I have him. Let me go to my links. I do. Now I can open him through InDesign, but it'll be opening in Photoshop. And this is really cool. So if I hold down if I right click or do control click on a Mac, I'm on my laptop so I don't have my mouse hooked up, but control click on a Mac, it's basically the same thing as right click. I think alt click is a right click on a PC. But if I go down to edit with, which is a little bit halfway down, I can open this in Photoshop. And I'm going to show you what I mean by a 1200 pixels per inch bitmapped TIFF, which I think I may have covered in another video. But if this were a vector graphic like one created in Illustrator, or if it were an RGB graphic in Photoshop, it won't work. It has to be a certain kind of graphic. Now it's taking a sweet time, but here he is. See, you can see he's black, but I colorized him the tan color in InDesign. Now, when I say bitmap TIFF and 1200 pixels per inch, if I go to image, I go to image size. You can see he's 1200 pixels per inch at about 8 inches by 8 inches. When I zoom in, I should not be able to see pixelization unless I'm zoomed way in. Okay? If you zoom in and you're seeing pixelization, that means that it started out too low of a resolution. You may have to get something higher. Now, what's it mean by being bitmapped? If you go to image mode, you need to have this say bitmap. If it says RGB, let me just make this look like something that might be a problem for you. If this is RGB or even CMYK, we can't colorize this guy in InDesign. So if you have an RGB mode image, you go to image mode, it won't let you go to bitmap. You have to go from grayscale to bitmap. So we go from RGB to grayscale, hit discard color information, then we go to image mode bitmap. Now here's the deal. This usually will say diffusion dither on the method. What that does is it makes all these little dots, which we don't want. We want nice sharp lines. So you want to choose 50% threshold. This means that anything black will go, anything 50% gray, 50% of black, which is like a middle gray, and darker will go black. Anything that's like 49% gray and lighter will go white. So that's what that means. And 1200 pixels per inch. You hit OK, and then you save it as a TIFF. Okay, so instead of Photoshop, you would save it as TIFF. I hit save. It'll probably ask me if I want to replace it, and then you just leave this stuff alone. Hit OK. Okay, so in order for me to colorize a graphic, it needs to be a bitmapped TIFF from Photoshop. So let me close that. Now let me go back to links, and he's just fine. I was looking to see if it would say if it was modified. Now by default, when I put him in here, let me get my white arrow tool, which is also known as a direct selection tool. He was originally black 100%. So I'm going to make him black 100%. Now let's say I want to gradiate him. We'll see what happens. Now I'm again going to have to tear off either my gradients or my swatches. There we go. I tore off gradient again. And I'm going to grab my gradient tool, and I'm going to see if I can gradiate this animal. Nothing really seems to be happening. So this doesn't work. Let me see if I use my hand tool, or the direct selection tool rather. Click on this. It says there's a gradient applied, or it acts like there is, but I don't think I can colorize this. Now, not with a gradient. So I can colorize it with a regular color. So there's only so much I can do with a gradient in regards to a bitmapped graphic. Now, if I'm using, say, Adobe Illustrator, and I have created a symbol in there and I've placed it in InDesign. Let me do that real quickly. I'm not sure. Everybody has different things that they're doing here, so I'm not sure how they're using the software. So I'm going to just create, and please pardon me, this is not going to be very good, just to try to get this to move quickly. So let's say I have this omega symbol, and I need it to, kind of looks like a horseshoe in a way. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, I'm counting, 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5. Yeah, I'm not being very careful about this. Again, this is not going to look the best because I'm not being all that careful. Oops, one more. There we go. And let's say I make this black with no stroke. Now, here, these are not bitmaps. These are vector graphics. Let me turn off my grid so we can see. Let me save this as, we usually save these as EPS files if they're going into InDesign. I'm going to go to my computer, my Macintosh, go find my class. You should be able to find your stuff really quickly like this. And I'm project 1 or project 2 symbol, and I'm saving this as omega.ai. There we go. Don't worry about this stuff. Hit OK. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go back to InDesign, and let me go out to the artboard out here. and I'm just going to place this graphic. File, place, Control D or Command D. And here we are. And it's oh, you don't want to do that. You don't want to accidentally put it inside of a box that's already there. So let me hit Command Z or Control Z on a PC, and it will reload the cursor, and then you can click somewhere else. You don't want to already have a box selected. Now, if I decide I want to gradient this, I'm like, oh, I want this color fill on this to be gradient, it will not work either. Okay? So how do you get a shape of something to be a gradient in here? Well, if this were type, sometimes we get typographic symbols that look like the omega. If we were type, if this were type, we could convert it to an outline. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to get rid of a few things here, folks, since we've already gone through that. So let's say I take this, the word ox, and maybe I just need the O. So this is typography, a piece of type. If, again, you can use the T tool and do the gradient that way. That's the way we did it before. Now if it's an object, let's say I needed to draw that omega symbol from Illustrator to InDesign. Let me go back to Illustrator. Now Illustrator and InDesign have some friendly capabilities, the compatibility. If I copy this and go to InDesign, I can actually paste it, and it is an object, it's not an image. And then I can put a gradient in that image. I clicked on the image, and let me go back just a little bit. I'm probably going too fast for you guys. Let me close this out here. So I click on the image, I find the gradient slider, assuming I've built it. Just click on it and it'll apply the gradient. Then you can modify these if you need to. If you want it to go a different direction, you can click and drag. Okay? So that's how we can apply a gradient to an object that's a vector path. So you can draw them in Illustrator and bring them into InDesign, or you can draw them in InDesign. This is just using the pen tool. So I could draw this either in InDesign or Illustrator, and then I can colorize it using a gradient. Again, this was somebody asking some specific questions for this, so I wanted to do a real quick demo on how to work with gradients in InDesign. So I hope you find this helpful. For some of you, it won't be necessary. Just keep in mind that this is a two-color job. Each of your 3 panels will use the same 2 colors. So when it came to first drafts, I noticed there was a little bit of color variation. The 2 colors are black and a second color, and that was a spot color, which was covered in a video. White is free, okay? So you could kind of think it's 3 color, but really it's 2 colors of ink, black ink and a Pantone spot color, whichever you choose that's appropriate. Okay, I'm finishing this video, and hopefully this, if you have any other questions, certainly send them to me and I'll make videos as we need to. Okay? Take care.